All right, let's start the program today with our top story, India's spiritual tourism industry. Now, it's not just about devotion, it's a powerhouse of innovation, transformation, and yes, in this case, billions of dollars. Ayodhya's rise as Uttar Pradesh's crown jewel as well. Tamil Nadu keeping its place as the most sought after destination of global pilgrims as well. Spirituality has gone mainstream in a big way in India. And did you know that religious tourism accounts for over 60% of all domestic travel in India? Well, that's a number to think about. And by 2028, this market is expected to hit $59 billion. It's not just the iconic landmarks like Varanasi, Rameshwaram that are thriving, but lesser known pilgrim and towns as well, like Ujjain, Ayodhya, Badrinath are breaking records. Searches for spiritual destinations have jumped by over 97% in the past 1 year. And it's not just temples, it's got to do with yoga retreats, it's got to do with awakening, meditation, all of this part of the meditation and the, tourism in a way.
Right, so Ayodhya you mentioned right now, that grew 585%, leaving even the Taj Mahal in its wake. Of course, this is the first year of collecting those kinds of numbers as India's top tourist spot as we speak. But the journey is just as fascinating as the destination, of course. And it's not just Indians that are fueling this trend. Let's take a look at some numbers.
Foreign tourists are flocking to India's spiritual hubs, with Tamil Nadu leading the pack, attracting over 6 lakh global visitors between January and June of 2024 alone. This influx is, of course, breathing a new life into the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, proving that spirituality isn't just a state of mind. It's also the backbone, becoming gradually at least, of India's booming domestic travel industry.
Okay, so we have two experienced guests coming onto the show to tell us two different angles of this entire story. We have economist and author of Dharmanomics. This is, of course, Sriram Balasubramanian. He's here on the show. And we do want to tell you before we go to both of our guests that Sriram has written a lot here in the economic and the historic context. So how temple towns at one point were foundational in different regions across the entire country, what it can mean in today's economy. He'll take us down that road. The other guest that we have with us here on the show is, of course, Dr. Tiwari. He's a professor at IIT Kanpur, and we'll actually go over to Dr. Tiwari with our first question. Doctor, can you just tell our audiences, we talked a little bit right now about Ayodhya and the Ram Mandir inauguration. When you take a look at the way in which that was carried out, do you think that should serve as the prototype for other temple towns, or is it not correct to say that because it needs to be tailor-made in every region to the region's requirements, to the town's requirements?
So, thanks for having me here. This is a wonderful topic to talk about. You talked about Ayodhya and you asked whether it could serve as the prototype for other places as well. So last year we had the consecration of the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, but that's a once in a 500-year event. So obviously, it cannot serve as a prototype, in terms of the scale of the event, the publicity which went around that, and so on and so forth. So that is one part. The other part, when you talked about in terms of introductory remarks, both of you, you talked about tourism, spiritual tourism, religious tourism. Actually, when you look at historic data right from several hundred years earlier till today, spiritual tourism, if you can call it by that term, it has been the mainstay of most of the travel in our country since ever we have been learning about our histories. We see from records of Fahian and Hyun-sang that actually Hyun-sang writes that I want to travel to India, to Prayagraj, to touch the waters of Ganga. So it's not just people from within our country who are coming here, but people from across different parts of the world. They have been congregating to places in our country. He went to Thaneshwar and several other places, not just Prayagraj. So this habit has been there in context of our country since a very ancient time. And it's just that in post Ayodhya, we are just waking up to it, because we are just realizing that, oh, there are crores and crores of people who are traveling across the country, and this is the most important reason they think when they want to travel. So,
Yeah, you're right in a way that it's always been part of our culture in a way, and Sriram Balasubramanian come in on this one. But something has changed, no? Something has changed in the way we look at spiritual tourism. If you look at wellness becoming so central to part of our lives, like I said, it's not just for religious reasons, it's for meditation, it's for finding inner peace, it's for a yoga retreat. People and younger people in big cities are actually doing more and more of this. It's almost become cool to do spiritual tourism. Sriram, can you give us a background into how this landscape has perhaps changed and what brought this change about?
Thank you. Thanks again for inviting me for this show. It's quite nice to be here. And of course, it's a very important topic. I think, like what the professor had said, that this has been, my argument has been that this has been there for thousands of years. This is the dharmic way of life. In its modern manifestation, you're seeing it in various forms and various avatars of, if you can put it that way. Because probably say 500 years back, people would go physically to these places en masse to attend a variety of festivals, and that is even more intrinsically driven in our society, because we're so culturally driven that a lot of our economic choices, especially at the discretionary spending level, which is basically non-essential spending, is largely driven by all the festivals and events that we have through the year. Unlike the West, for example, much of the entire sort of expenditure spend, shopping spree is through the Christmas sort of, and Thanksgiving period. Whereas in Bharat, it's a different story altogether. Of course, you have a lot of concentration in major festivals like Diwali, but there's a continuous sequence of, what I call the dharmic way of life, which is in its manifestation, which is highly inelastic demand, because it doesn't really matter what the Reserve Bank's interest rate is today or 12 years back. You would still have millions of people coming to the Kumbh, for example, right? And just to give you some context of some numbers, just to tell you how big it is, if you look at the estimates, there's about 7,000 crores invested in the Kumbh, about 5,000 crores from the state and 2,000 crores from the center. And the estimate, and there are, for example, 7,500 buses, 3,000 special trains, lakhs of toilets, and all this infrastructure that's developed. And the estimate of income from this is about 2.5 lakh crores.
Yeah.
And just to give you again context, the GDP of Uttar Pradesh for the last year was 25.8 lakh crores.
Yeah.
So we're talking about almost 5 to 10% of the GDP.
Yeah, we actually did cover this topic yesterday
Just
as well,
yesterday,
when we were talking about the economics of how it all actually works out, all projected numbers, just a caveat over there. But these are on lines of which a lot of people are saying. But I'm sure Toy had a question.
Yeah, if we could ask the professor, many experts have said, and this is over the last few years, that there is a tension between developing the infrastructure around a temple town and A, the sanctity, and B, the environmental sustainability. 3, they've also argued sometimes that locals are not being included in the ways in which they should. I want to go back to that question I asked you in the beginning about prototypes. We'll put aside Ram Mandir, but I'll instead ask you, are there other prototypes across the country where you think that on any one of these key measures they've done a beautiful job? You'd point to that?
Okay. So I'll touch that particular topic, but I'll also address this question on spirituality and religious tourism, and you were trying to delineate between these two ideas. So now just pause for a moment and look at Kumbh. I mean, what do people do when they go to Kumbh? We have estimates about 40 crore people. They go to a place, Prayagraj. They stay there in shivering cold, doesn't have a lot of entertainment facilities. Actually, when they go, they take a bath. I went to Kumbh last week, and the waters of Ganga were really cold, probably 10 degrees or something. So it was really shivering cold. And a lot of these folks, they sit there for almost a month. They call themselves as Kalpvasis in tents, and these are very humble tents. So this is not like fancy tents when you go out for a trekking and stuff like that. They sit there, eat simple meals, contemplate, and take a shower every day. They do not use modern cosmetics, soaps, shampoos when they take a shower because they think it's not proper. That's the lifestyle they are inculcating in themselves. So is it religion or is it spirituality? I think it is a merger of both of these. And when these folks come back to their distant towns and villages and cities, they share their experiences. They also, when they are in Kumbh, they interact with a lot of people. So they learn how to live with less, and they learn how to live with others. And they also learn how to endure and take a little bit of, difficulties in the stride. And they take that attitude, go back to far-flung areas of our country, share their experiences, and because they have practiced this, probably they inculcate these things. So I think this is a very unique way of talking about environment, where 40 crore folks can come, do things in a sustainable way, go back, and again proliferate their ideas and new things which they learned to the larger communities of Bharat. So that is one. That is the prototype. That is the prototype. And I think that prototype works even today for other quote unquote temple towns, because most of these towns, again, you go to a mandir, you don't have a lot of, there's not a lot of paraphernalia that you have a lot of complicated stuff. Basically, you take few leaves, few flowers, a little bit of rice, a little bit of water, pour it or offer it to the murti, come back. That's all you do. I mean, when you look at it from 60,000 feet level or 40, that's all. But ingrained in that habit is, trying to understand and develop an attitude that, oh, I'm just one little speck.
Sure.
When you, out of these 40 crore folks. So it also inculcates a sense of humility. I'm a part of this larger cosmos and so on and so forth. So I think that addresses both these questions, which I think Toya talked about.
Yeah, Sriram, can I turn the leaf on this discussion a little bit and sort of get your opinion on how, in this case of spiritual tourism, it is actually one of those things which ties in our history very beautifully with what's happening currently. A lot of younger folks, like I said, a lot of folks from big cities are making these travels. It's not your traditional sort of trek and pilgrimage, as one would call it. Like when we were growing up in the 90s, people would take a pilgrimage. People going to Vaishno Devi was one of that. Now it's become travel and spiritual tourism. Is there a change that you can sense in this?
Yeah, definitely, right? Because as when we are growing up, like you mentioned in the 90s, India's income levels are far lesser. So our the opportunities that you have when you go to a particular place were fairly limited, right? The things that you could do, the support infrastructure, right? So, for example, today you can travel from any place, literally in India, in Bharat, to various even tier 2, tier 3 cities very comfortably. I mean, you can take a flight, and go to these places. So what I'm trying to say is that the entire infrastructure, income levels have risen, so there are more opportunities compared to before, so that you can sort of combine a lot of other things while pursuing these activities. So what is really expanded is, I mean, the temple as a religious institution, pretty much like what the professor said, remains and it does primarily what it's supposed to do. But the temple-based ecosystem around it, the infrastructure and the development that is created to facilitate, the entire expression of this dharmic way of life has expanded significantly because our income levels have gone up. So there are tremendous opportunities in terms of tourism, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of, going from one place to another, and decentralization of economic activity. Because remember, the most important aspect is most Indian villages, there is a central temple as a primarily an economic institution which drives commerce through all these levers. So what it does is it helps you to expand the tier 2 and tier 3 cities in a much more scalable manner. And because of the fact that this is being done in a sort of an ad hoc way, you see that more and more people are interested. And of course, modern challenges, get people into spirituality and get younger people into spirituality for another set of reasons. And this also sort of gels well with that narrative as well. But I think there are, two distinct things here. One is the entire sort of what I call the dharmic ecosystem as a religious enterprise or religious entity, which is of course its primary purpose. That should be the focus, because that's its particular role. But as an add-on, you have an entire ecosystem which is developing in a very decentralized manner. So targeted ways of sort of expanding this even more will make a lot of people further more interested. And more, I think that's what is happening. I mean, it's happening in an ad hoc manner, and we see it in stark, visuals in such a huge event like the Maha Kumbh. But this is something that is happening, week in, week out in this country. And that, is a very important factor. Especially in the entire informal economy and non-urban economics, structures, this plays a very important role.
Sriram, can I ask you, in interviews, you've sometimes said that the potential here is essentially that you could create, in the US you have college towns, you could create something like that in the country. Right now, you said, it's sort of done in an ad hoc manner. And another thing you've said, in interviews past, is that the other thing that needs to change is data collection. There needs to be more data around such events. This was before the Maha Kumbh took place. This time when the Maha Kumbh has taken place, have you thought that that has changed? Do you think more needs to be done? And if so, how? How can we make data collection better here?
Yeah, that's a very important, thanks for your observations. I think that has been something which I've been, pushing and sort of nudging policymakers to think about. See, the Maha Kumbh is a unique experience, right? I mean, it's a 45-day period. The entire world is looking at this. There are millions of people coming. So, the approach to such an event is different. Of course, it's done in such a mammoth, spectacular way, and much credit for the administration for pulling this off. But what we are essentially talking about is those thousands of, temples in various villages, for which, people go, every week or every other week for various events. And data is an issue. I mean, if you look at, say, Tamil Nadu, you just mentioned, there are, thousands of temples in Tamil Nadu, but a centralized database, of what the commerce is, what are the numbers of people who are coming in, because we have estimates of revenues of those individual institutions as temples. What you do once you go inside a temple, and how much money you donate, or how much you pay for, say, archana, or how much you do all these activities within a temple. But what is lacking is, I mean, first of all, we need a robust data for that itself, how much temples generate revenue, and then the data outside in terms of the economy, right? How much of it, is being created because of this, as an extension is also important. And lastly, on the point of temple towns, of course, I mean, I think any society should aspire to have university towns, like, for example, other developed countries, and that's something we are, continuously aspiring towards, providing world-class institutions. But when you already have established institutions like this in place, you might as well make use of them in terms of commerce and how it can drive commerce as well. And I think targeted sort of schemes to look at these institutions can help to grow the tier 2, tier 3 cities. For example, my last point, if you take Srirangam, which is near Tiruchi in Tamil Nadu, which is a very famous Vaishnavite temple, it has thousands of people who visit the temple every other day. But the town is determined by the temple and its ecosystem. So if you are able to develop, say, economic models which can expand this pie in terms of the economic ecosystem around it, then I think we really have a more targeted sort of specific ways of driving economic activity. And this is very important because the demand is very inelastic.
Yeah.
It means no matter what happens, if there is, for example, a particular festival, most people are going to come to that area, to that temple to visit. Okay, they might not spend, instead of spending, say, 100 rupees, they might spend, say, 20 rupees or 50 rupees, depending if there's a recession. But they will still make the travel, they'll still make the travel arrangements, they will still come in infrastructure, they'll use the infrastructure. So this inelastic demand is again a very good thing because it drives a lot of economic activity in that area. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done, but yeah, starting off data I think is very important, and then more sort of targeted things. And I try to flesh this out a bit more in my subsequent book, which hopefully I will discuss with you as well the next year.
All right, Sriram Balasubramanian.
Actually, I'd like to add to.
I'd
like to add a point
quickly,
to
Dr.
what,
Tiwari.
Surely. Which Sriram mentioned, that not only is this demand inelastic, but a lot of this demand is local in nature. So you require certain things which are produced locally, and if you bring in stuff from far off areas, then it doesn't fit into that ecosystem. So a lot of the benefits of that development get distributed to the grassroots level, and real prosperity can emerge if you pursue this model of development as well.
Sure. Then, Dr. Tiwari, can we sort of ask you this and expand this to beyond when we talk about spiritual tourism? Like I said, the definition is not just temple towns, right? The definition is actually a lot of other yoga retreats, there are mindful centers, and like I said, it's becoming more modern, it's becoming more inclusive of people who expect a particular level of premiumness, etc. So is all of that also showcasing in other towns? And isn't that also an opportunity to bring tourism to places like, say, Coorg, or say Rishikesh, or say Ajanta Ellora, or say down south as well, where these retreats are being set up?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's a no-brainer that there's a group of people who are a little more affluent. They have more money to spend. They have certain different sets of requirements. So they want certain sets of experiences. So if you want to develop, or if the government is interested in developing that, those types of facilities, or facilitating that kind of a development through engaging private sector, that should be done. And I think a lot of that stuff in that direction is already happening. A lot of organizations like Art of Living or Sadhguru's organizations, there are several organizations which are actually driving development in this particular area. So that is happening, and I think it's happening very organically. I mean, no one is forcing that thing. But in the larger scheme of things, the number of people who belong to that particular club is still extremely small, because we are still economically at a macro level. We are nowhere near even South Korea, for that sake, forget United States. So that is there, but I think most of the activity is happening in places like Kumbh, and in places, and it involves people who are not that much affluent. So that is the reality, and we have to develop in both these directions. I mean, there's no A or B, or A versus B, or something like that. So that's there.
All right, this has been such an extensive discussion. Professor Tiwari, Mr. Balasubramanian, thank you so much for joining us. Several areas where we know we need to grow, and several areas where we know things are doing beautifully. Different temple towns across the entire country. This has been an extensive discussion. We're going to head into a quick break. On the other side, we're going to be taking a look at on the road. What is the vehicle overdrive is taking a look at right now? It's a motorcycle. They're going to bring you the verdict on the BMW R1300 GSA. Overdrive tells you whether or not you should go for it.